Chapter 36, Ida, Sam, and the Muckrakers. On January 16, 1787, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to his friend Edward Carrington. He said, "The way to prevent errors of the people is to give them full information of their affairs through the channel of the public papers, and to contrive that those papers should penetrate the whole mass of the people. The basis of our government being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that right. And were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." The First Amendment to the Constitution, also known as Article 1 of the Bill of Rights, says, "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press." Our free press, some call it the fourth branch of our government, an unofficial but very important branch. Since early colonial times, Americans have been eager readers of newspapers and journals. But America's leaders have often become exasperated with that free press. No one likes to be criticized, and that is exactly what good journalists do. Sometimes the media can be irresponsible, though libel laws usually control deliberate lying. You can sue a newspaper if it lies and that lie harms you. A public figure must prove that the newspaper or TV program knew that what it was saying was false and that it had reckless disregard for the truth. Jefferson never changed his mind about the importance of the press, and Americans have always understood that if we are to solve our problems, we need information. A free press supplies that information. At the turn of the century, America had unusually difficult problems to solve. The country was experiencing astonishing growth, industrialization and urbanization, an influx of many different peoples, and excessive government corruption. People needed to understand these phenomena to be able to deal with them. To understand them, they had to have information. Just when they were needed, some remarkable writers and editors appeared. They looked at America critically, fearlessly, and honestly, and they explained what they saw. These writers were called muckrakers. Muck is dirt. Muckrakers were journalists who wrote about wrongs, about injustice, unfairness, and corruption. A woman named Nellie Bly. Elizabeth Jane Cochran was called Nellie Bly, which was the way she signed her newspaper articles. Nellie got started when she wrote a sizzling letter to the editor of the Pittsburgh Dispatch. After reading it, he hired her. She was soon writing for the most talked about newspaper in the country, Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. Most women who were reporters, and there weren't many of them, were assigned to the cooking or household beat. Not Nellie Bly. She was a daredevil reporter who went around the globe to see if she could outdo the exploits of a character named Phileas Fogg in a popular novel by Jules Verne, Around the World in 80 Days. She did it. When she decided to write about the treatment of the mentally ill, she pretended to be insane, got herself committed to an asylum, and wrote the best-selling series of articles Inside the Madhouse. Later, Bly became the first woman to cover the European front in World War I. They went into slaughterhouses where animals were killed and meat was processed, and they saw rats and dirt and described what they saw. They wrote about city bosses and told how dishonest government cheated citizens of their rights and money. They wrote about the mighty industrial tycoons, about how some of them broke the law and got away with it, and why that cost the public great sums of money. And they wrote that in a democracy, all of these wrongs could be righted by the people, but only if the people are informed and take the time to vote. The muckrakers had several things in common. They wrote unusually well, they did careful research, and they cared, really cared, about making this country a better place to live. They developed a new kind of journalism, investigative journalism, just at a time when publishing techniques made it possible to produce a good magazine, distribute it widely, and sell it for 10 cents. Everyone seemed to read the muckrakers' articles, and that made them very influential. They helped bring about change. Food inspection laws were passed, antitrust laws were enforced, reforming mayors were elected to office. Ida Tarbell was a muckraker, although she preferred to call herself a historian. Actually, she was both, and amazingly good at both callings. Of all the muckrakers, Ida Tarbell was the most famous. When she was a little girl, she heard women reformers say that if she wanted a career, she would have to give up the idea of marriage. Tarbell vowed never to marry, and she never did. Ida became a teacher, but she found she didn't want to teach, so she went off to Europe. She had little money and a lot of adventurousness, and she could write. She believed she could write articles that would support her. That was what she was doing in France when the doorbell rang and Samuel Sidney McClure walked into her life. Sam McClure came from an Irish family that had immigrated to the United States. His mother worked as a maid and washerwoman. Sam worked hard and made enough money to pay for college. After college, he wrote for a biking magazine. Bicycling was the new rage. And then he got a bright idea. He would start a syndicate for writers. No one had ever done that before. He bought articles from very good writers and sold each article to several publications. The authors made more money than if they had sold to just one journal, and small papers and magazines were able to publish the best authors. By now, Sam McClure realized that what he really wanted to do was to be an editor. In 1896, he borrowed money and founded McClure's magazine. Not long after, he received an article from an unknown author. It was about paving the streets of Paris. That was an unlikely topic, but as soon as he started reading, he said to an associate, "This girl can write. I want her to do some work for the magazine." So he went to Paris, met the author, Ida Tarbell, and established one of the most productive collaborations in the history of journalism.